Hello, I'm Neil Patterson. Sean rang me up the other day. He wanted to put me in the raffle. So here I am, Sean. But no one's going to be able to afford me, I thought. I was baffled by this raffle. No, Sean went on. Not in the raffle, doing the introduction to the raffle, the Walmart man bit. So here I am, anything to help the cause. But let's go back to being able to afford things. I really can't afford to spend time just going fishing. Trout, tarpon, whatever I'm after, there's got to be a wild side to it. Interesting things happen that way. But thinking back, it's never been the numbers nor the size of fish I catch that stick in the mind. This I forget. Rather, it's the people, the great and the good, and the not so good that I've met, and the expected and unexpected things that have happened to me because I fly fish. These I never forget. Got a coffee? Sitting comfortably? Let me read you a story or two. I've always fly fished, always. So much so, when I was 12, my parents sent me to a boarding school with a river running through it, a salmon river in the wilds of Perthshire. Every spare moment, I was down on that river fishing. Don't ask me number or weights of fish, but I did catch something. The attention of a boy, a year my senior. His name was Anthony Robert McMillan. Robin McMillan. Larger than life, he'd impersonate all his teachers, and anyone else for that matter. Fab Rab, we called him. Now, Fab Rab desperately wanted to run away from school. When he saw me disappear for hours, he wanted to know where I escaped to, and he asked me to take him fishing, which I did. But after 2 or 3 escapes, he decided faffing around with a fly rod just wasn't for him. After a fag behind a rock, he escaped back to his study, right next door to mine. Now, the walls were paper thin. His music always loud, always jazz, mostly his hero, saxophonist John Coltrane. I wasn't too unhappy when him and his noise left. Years passed. I turned on the TV one day, and there he was, alongside Hugh Laurie, Stephen Fry, and Emma Thompson in a sketch series Al Fresco. He changed his name. He was now, not surprisingly, Robbie Coltrane. Now, some years later, I was sitting having lunch with workmates in a restaurant in Soho, when out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a large face at the window, looking my way. It disappeared as quickly as it appeared. That was Robbie Coltrane, someone said. The words, pity I missed him, we were at school together, had hardly got out of my mouth when the restaurant door was flung open and darkness fell. The huge shape of something human stood in the doorway. It was Fab Rab. With a bullish puff and a snort, the 26-stone Coltrane marched straight up to me and started bawling at the top of his voice in the most terrifying Glaswegian accent, that of an enraged welder at the governed shipworks, accusing me of having an affair with his wife. All manner of horrid threats were made, with words I could never repeat here. Carry on with my wife, he finally bellowed, and yet tease out. With this, he stormed off, slamming the door behind him. Everyone in the restaurant was shaking and looking around at me, also shaking. That true, Neil? Someone stuttered. Of course not, I said. Any opportunity to put on a show. He'll be back in a minute to say hello. He never came back. I remember Fab Rab and that fishing tip he taught me that day. The importance of timing, knowing how and when to strike, when to set the hook to full effect. He sure landed it on me that lunch. Knowledge is knowing the extent of one's ignorance, so said Confucius in 500 BC. So he's had plenty of time to change his mind. Now, the little I know because I tell those who I know more than I do, that I don't know anything. This way, I get to know things they thought I knew, but didn't. Don't you know? One thing I do know is that when I've been very lucky to have met, fished, and made friends with fly fishers who, when it comes to knowing things about fly fishing, are the bee's knees and the crab's ankles. Fly fishers with many more years of experience than me. Fly fishers with international and local knowledge, gillies, guides, and Goddard, the late John Goddard, a good friend who knew a thing or two, and who taught me a thing or two, or 1, or 10, or 20. He just went on learning. I went on learning from him. Now, things like how not catching fish is an excellent way to increase your knowledge on how to catch them. I better explain. In the last few years of his life, John couldn't drive. We took turns in taking him to his private lake in Surrey where he was a member. There was only one small boat. The one thing I did know was that John would have me row the whole length of the lake to the far corner, regardless of the wind strength. One morning we caught nothing. After lunch, 2 hours went by and we still hadn't caught anything. Any ideas? I asked John. Have you got one of my tadpoles with you? He replied. That should do the trick. This was John's imitation of a tadpole. I had one and tied it on. Almost immediately I had a trout hanging on the end of my line. Told you so, John said with his usual girly giggle, tying one on himself. 2 minutes later he was helping him land his first fish of the day too. And so went on, trout after trout, but not for my boat partner. John was fiddling around at the other end of the boat, tying on this fly, that fly, all sorts of different flies, new patterns he wanted to try out. Patterns he was hoping might be just as effective or even more killing than a tadpole that was catching virtually a fish at every cast. John was happy, back catching nothing. He started the whole learning process again, reversing all that he knew and what he discovered. He knew this would only increase his knowledge and his catch rate. In effect, he was coming face to face, not with the extent of his knowledge, but of his ignorance, and becoming even more knowledgeable as a result. Dear John, we miss you, your flies, and your wisdom. Let's go to Wales. The Wales 8,000 miles southwest of here. The Wales in Argentina and Patagonia. But not way down south in the highly priced, well-publicised Tierra del Fuego, where, apart from the fishing, watching a relentless wind blow the skins off llamas is really the only other interesting thing that happens down there. Unlike the central Patagonia, no one ever writes or talks about, because so few people ever go there. Apart from the first Welsh colonists who in the 1850s crossed from the east coast, finally settling in the Andes in the west. And it was here I settled too. Now, we've all had good and bad neighbours. If you're lucky, you don't get to find out how good or bad they are. In the 10 years I owned a cabana just outside Chilila on the banks of the River Carrileofu, where I was the only Englishman for 150 miles, I didn't have to borrow sugar or lean over the fence and pass the time of day with Robert Leroy Parker, nor Harry Longerbach, nor any of the rest of the gang who had run away from the United States and lived just down the road from my cabana in a small farmstead that's still there, from 1901 to 1907, where they upped and moved to Bolivia and where in 1908 they were tracked down and shot dead. But not before they gunned down a Welsh settler, the great-grandfather of my fishing guide, Alun Lloyd, called Lloyd ap Iwan, the only person in Argentina to be gunned down by those could have been my neighbours, better known as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Now Lloyd had opened up a store, the Mercantile Company, the only one for miles. News of its success travelled far, soon reaching the ears of those bandits who had once lived next door. The story goes that the night of 28th of December, 1905, Lloyd woke up to the sound of a torch being thrown through his bedroom window. He fired a few shots, scared off the bandits, and put out the fire. Next day, they came back. This time they overpowered the not-so-happy Wan. During the looting, Butch Cassidy's spurs got tangled up in the thick woolen rug, and he fell over. Lloyd jumped on him, grabbed the pistol, reached for the trigger, but there wasn't one. The gun had been modified to be fanned. The hammer repeatedly pulled back the side of the palm. Bang, bang, bang. But burned hands from the night before, Lloyd wasn't quick enough, and the Sundance Kid shot him in the head with his Winchester .45 rifle. So neighbours? Well, they say a good neighbour is someone who smiles at you over the fence, but doesn't climb over. Worth noting if you ever consider buying a property in Patagonia's Wild West. Now I have a motto: do interesting things and interesting things happen to you. So let's stay in Patagonia, where interesting things continue to happen. On the Argentine-Chilean border, the Rio Rosario slides through the land farmed by the Lewis family since 1865. At dinner the night before I fished this stream, Michael, my guide that day, talked about this lonely part of Patagonia that the Welsh named Nanthy Falls, where the homesteaders still go up into the hills and hunt puma, wild boar, Chilean rustlers, and anyone who shouldn't be there, with lever-action rifles and sinister dog breeds the size of Volkswagens. We were very lucky to be allowed to fish there. The owner, Senor Lewis, was suspicious about everyone. He didn't want to make a foot wrong in his company, if you could call him company. He was as distant as a planet. It's like looking into a cave, Michael went on, asking round the table who wanted to join us the next day. We were in a hotbed of cold feet. Next morning, I wasn't sure I was on a fishing trip of a lifetime or the freight train to Crazy Town. We'd hardly set foot on Lewis land when a rider approached, sitting high up on a sheepskin saddle, flanked by two dubious-looking minders, one half Mapuche Indian, the other half Tuelche, both half wild beast, with Colt 38 stuck into stained leather holsters, hand grips wrapped round with band-aid. Scary for sure, but this wasn't Lewis. Rainbows up to £6 are caught here, Michael said, trying to take my mind off the impending doom. A rusty, blue Ford Falcon appeared out of the woods and stopped at a gate. Michael jumped out to open it. I followed. The passenger window was wound down, enough for me to see a face blackened by the sun, a wispy, tobacco-stained moustache, eyebrows you could knit into a jumper, and a gaucho berry that looked like it had been moulded onto the owner's head. It was Lewis, the unsettling settler from hell. A large woman dressed in black, sitting behind the wheel next to him, looked me up and down and scowled. Michael introduced me to Lewis, who was also looking me up and down. I was getting a damn good looking up and down. Lewis growled to Michael something in Spanish. Michael nodded and turned to me. Senor Lewis says he's honoured. Such an expert fisherman from England is going to be fishing his river. He extends his warm welcome and wishes you the very best of luck. All the while, Lewis was beaming semi-smiles at my way, smiles wide enough to reveal whatever other despicable things he might have wanted to do to me. He didn't have enough teeth to bite my head off. With this, the satanic Lewis and his fearsome chauffeurs in black disappeared down the track. That was Lewis? The Lucifer? I asked. That was him, Michael confirmed. But he smiled. Well, Michael said, climbing back into the pickup, a man's on his best behaviour when he's in the company of his mother-in-law. Now let's go somewhere more friendly, Russia. I have a very good friend called Steve, Lord Shoreditch to his mates. I call him my running mate. We're always running away with one another to his river, my river, someone else's river, and one time to his maker, very nearly. The one time I wasn't there to look after it. Going fishing is like going to movies. You never know how things are going to turn out. It's why you go fishing. It's the thrill of the unexpected. For Steve, that day on the Vasuga River in northern Russia, the unexpected happened. Without the thrill, just the chill. Winter water was still coming down the Vasuga. With it, huge blocks of ice. Steve hooked into a double-figure salmon the same size as him. The only thing on his mind was avoiding losing it. With water barely above freezing point, teetering just above the top of his chest waders, one thing that didn't avoid him was a block of ice, a veritable iceberg that struck him. An inflatable rescued him, and he got the salmon, all 17 pounds of it, and they reckoned a few broken ribs, perhaps a fractured jaw. As soon as he got back to Shoreditch, he went for a checkup. At the surgery, the waiting area was packed full. He made his way to the end of the long queue at the back of the waiting room where there was standing room only. He'd hardly got there when his name was called out. The doctor would see him now. When he walked into the surgery, the doctor was studying his notes. Thanks, mate, for seeing me so quickly, Steve said, wondering why he was the lucky one. Are all those people out, your patients, waiting for you out there? Yes, Mr. Edge. Sit down, the doctor said. I had to see you straight away. Had he spotted something the medical team at the lodge had missed? Your case is quite unique, the doctor went on. Steve was really worried now. You see, I retire in 2 weeks, and in all my 40 years as a doctor here, I've never treated someone hit by an iceberg in London. Hot places, cold places. I fish around the world, but it's ice that reminds me of one of the many trips I made to Cuba. We were booked into this floating fishing lodge for a week after bonefish off the east coast. Here we met up with a rather large, square-shaped Canadian, the owner of some tackle shop outside Toronto. Everyone called him Fridge. Now, contrary to his name, Fridge was a warm, friendly kind of guy, great fun, and he always had a story to tell. Sharing a skiff with him out there on the Gulf of Mexico in temperatures nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it was good to have a fridge aboard to cool you down. When we all joined up for lunch on a small island crawling with iguanas, you could tell Fridge was longing to break the ice with some tale or other. The opportunity arrived when we were presented with sandwiches the size of bricks, and Fridge turned down the offer of coffee. "Coffee's no good out of a flask," he said. "It has to be hot, hot, hot." Whereupon he started telling a story about when him and his friend stayed in some high-class salmon fishing lodge somewhere in New Brunswick. In this lodge, a rather attractive girl called Rita did the cooking, the cleaning, and the waitress stuff. More than this, if you ordered breakfast in your room, she'd bring it up to your room. Every day Fridge had the same, a muffin and coffee. Rita just loved coffee, and if you offered, Fridge told us, she'd stay for coffee and a chat. One morning, Fridge ordered up the usual, and when Rita brought it up to his room, he asked if she would like a cup of coffee too. She said she'd love to, so Fridge locked the door. He didn't want the coffee to get cold. He was about to dunk his muffin when there was a knock on the door. It was the lodge owner. "Is Rita in there?" he shouted. Now, Fridge wasn't a panicking type. He had the answer. His friend was in the adjoining room, so he jumped up and knocked on the door between the two rooms. When his friend opened it up, he pushed Rita in, shut the door, and let the lodge owner in. The lodge owner looked around. Seeing no Rita, he growled a little and left. When he'd gone, Fridge tried to open the adjoining door, but it was locked. His friend wouldn't give him back his Rita. But Fridge was full of ideas. He phoned the lodge owner and told him if he wanted to know where Rita was, she was next door in his friend's room. Minutes later, there was a knock on Fridge's friend's door. Straight away, the adjoining door opened up and Rita was thrown back in. Now, we all like stories to have a happy ending, but not this one. You see, Fridge went on, while all this was going on, my coffee got cold. Now, those of you drinking coffee at the moment to stay awake, the end is very nearly nigh. Finally, what's fly fishing to me? Fly fishing is a form of freedom. The freedom to meet new people, to make lifelong friends with people you'd never have met. It's the freedom to go to wild places you'd never have gone to. Wild places, fast disappearing. Yes, they're not building them anymore. And this is where you come in. Wild streams can and are being restored. Wild trout protected. It's what this raffle is all about. A chance for you to put hands in pockets and raise the stakes. Raise the stakes that tomorrow there will still be wild places to go to where wild fish, trout can flourish. Thanks to the energy, commitment and tireless work of the Wild Trout Trust, where we rightly put our trust, and your invaluable support, where we trust you will be widely successful tonight. And that's your lot, from me anyway. Get bidding.